Hello, my name is Jim Troxel, and I'm a member of the Dambach Fellowship Founders Council. We're comprised of a half dozen former classmates of Chic Dambach from the late 1960s at Oklahoma State University. And together we launched the Dambach Peacebuilder Endowment Fund for OSU's School of Global Studies to honor Chic. So far, two students, one from Ghana and one from Nigeria, have benefited from the Dambach Peacebuilder Fellowship. This video recording, done in January 2025, is an interview of Chic, whom you probably know has had an outstanding public service career in the field of international relations, ranging from being a judge of kayak competitions in several Olympics to leading efforts to bring about border disputes in nations in Africa. At the end of this video, we will provide you with some series of resources, such as YouTube links and other websites that will help you learn more about Chic, as well as the endowment that's in his name at Oklahoma State University in the School of Global Studies. For now, though, let's talk with Chic directly and learn what he has been doing and thinking lately. So, Chic, let's first begin by asking you, how did your commitment to building peace around the world come about?
Well, thank you, Jim. Thank you for this opportunity, and I have to express my appreciation to you and the members of the council for creating this whole thing. It's far more than I deserve, but I'm grateful that it's there, and I hope people will accept it on behalf of our whole group of students at OSU who did some pretty remarkable things back in the 60s and then throughout our careers. And the Peace Corps community and the other people that I've worked with. So it's not me. It's a whole group of people who have been doing some pretty remarkable things. I just happen to be a part of it, and I'm honored to have the opportunity to do so. You asked about how all this came about, and I grew up in the 50s and 60s, like most people. With the same attitudes. And in fact, when the war started up in Vietnam, I was ready to drop out of school, join the Marines, and go and kill the communists, because that's what we did. But I encountered some people who caused me to start thinking about it. I was on the debate team, and in the debate program, we started doing an analysis of what was going on, and discovered what a colossal mistake it was for the United States to have gone to war in Vietnam. For one thing, the side we were fighting for was no more democratic than the other guys, and no more respectful of human rights than the other guys. They were bad guys, and here we were fighting and killing people on their behalf. And I thought, that's just colossally wrong, and I was not willing to be a part of it. But then, as I got kind of a further away from it, started thinking, well, if that one is so wrong, and I was so ready to be a part of it, and so many people were ready to be a part of it, what about the rest of them? And began to think about the whole place of the use of violent force to achieve any kind of ends, and recognized that it's just not reasonable, rational, or acceptable to use violence to achieve anything. It's not what we do in our homes. When we're raising our kids, they get into disputes. We don't give them hand grenades. We teach them how to find a nonviolent way to resolve it. Same in our neighborhoods. When neighbors get mad at each other, we don't plant landmines along the borders. We work it out, and it just only makes sense to do that. And if it makes sense in the rest of our lives, why not at the larger scale? Why not find non-violent ways to resolve our differences? Violence doesn't determine who's right or who's wrong. It only says one side can inflict more pain and suffering on the other side. That is a totally irrational, unacceptable way to resolve differences. So when I thought those things through and reached that conclusion, I said, well, then I've got to see what I can do about that in my way, with whatever contacts I have, groups I can be part of, to try to help bring about a change. So that's what happened.
So we hear these terms like peace, peacemaking, peace activism, peacekeeping, peace building. What do they all mean and how do they relate and connect with one another?
It's a good question, Jim. The people who aren't directly involved really kind of hear these terms and are you generally are not quite sure what to make of them. Peace, from my perspective, is coexistence. It is people simply carrying on with their lives along with other people carrying on with their lives without doing harm to one another. That's just a basic concept of what peace means. Um, Peace activism is what we did on the campus back in the 60s and other people do today of citizens individually and as part of groups coming together to express their opposition to the use of violence by their governments, by other governments, or by whoever, including opposition to gang violence. That's activism where we simply individually and as groups express our opposition to the use of violence. Peacekeeping is what is done when there have been negotiations to end violence, but the adversaries are still pretty mad at each other and inclined to go back to violence again unless prevented from doing so. And that's what peacekeepers do. The main example of peacekeeping is what we call the blue helmets out of the United Nations, where there's a negotiated end to a violent conflict someplace, and troops wearing blue helmets come in and keep the adversaries separated from each other. So that's the term peacekeeping. Peace building is a kind of a larger concept of constructing and putting into place the systems and the mechanisms that enable societies to live peacefully long term. Peace building is done intentionally, and just like any other kind of building. If you build a house, first you start off with a conception of what it is that you want. Conception here is of a society that lives at peace, but then you have to figure out how are you going to make that happen. What are the building blocks of a house or a building? And what are the building blocks of peace? What are the systems, structures, and attitudes that enable us to live in peace? So we develop those concepts, and then you have to build it. And that's where organizations like the Alliance for Peace Building and its member organizations, but also within governments, within our societies, we create the institutions and the structures that enable us to do it. So we build those things. That's why we call it peace building.
Okay, but we've also heard the terms positive peace, negative peace, and then even the term culture of peace. Could you give us a definition of those and maybe an example?
Certainly. Negative peace is the absence of violence, which is a good thing. I kind of dislike the term negative, but that's kind of what it is. It means something. It means you don't have violence, which is kind of the first objective of peace building and peace work, is just to put an end to the environment of violence. Positive peace is the more proactive efforts to create and build and maintain those structures and attitudes that enable societies to live long term at peace. What was the other one?
The culture of peace.
Culture of peace. Yes, culture of peace is kind of the attitude that people have about their societies and how we live together. And frankly, most of the world lives in a culture of peace. Most of the world lives at peace. And it's that kind of cultural understanding that I think is so very important. There are some places that don't have a culture of peace that seem to think that it's okay. And I think it really boils down to this: is it or is it not okay to use violence to achieve one's ends? A culture of peace where the culture says, no, it's not okay. It's not okay to use violence. A culture of violence is where you say, well, if you want something and the only way you can get it is through violence, then go ahead. That's okay. That's a culture of violence. Culture of peace says, no, it's not okay. It's never okay. And we won't tolerate it. We won't put up with it. So that's basically what I mean by a culture of peace, where you simply do not accept the legitimacy of using violence to achieve one's objectives.
Okay, about 10 years ago, you did your TED Talk. I believe it was titled Why Not Peace?
Yep.
And in it, as I recall, you emphasized the remarkable progress worldwide in the reduction of hunger and poverty and war and this sort of thing. How did that happen? And lately, would you say things are slipping backwards, or what's your assessment of the peace building process today as compared to 10 years ago?
Well, the perception most people have is that the world is in chaos and in terrible shape. I don't embrace that perception of it, though. The last few years we have seen a resurgence of some violence in very stark terms. It is very disturbing. But the progress came about coming out of World War II, and there are a number of things that I think caused that. One of them is World War II was just so absolutely horrible that mankind saw that and just basically came out of it saying, we just cannot let this continue to happen. And intentionally, the leaders of the world came together and created institutions, most notably the United Nations, but others as well, regional institutions, to enable us to find ways other than the use of violent force to resolve our differences. So we've put in place a lot of international institutions and structures as an alternative to the use of violent force to resolve those differences. And just do a Google search on international conflict and the history of it, and you'll find charts and graphs and data that shows a huge progress since 50, 60, 100 years ago. None of us, I think, would want to go back to those times. I think humanity recognized the stupidity. In fact, that's the way Eisenhower referred to it. Eisenhower referred to the use of war as stupid and futile and an abomination that must be avoided. That was one of the great Army generals referring to it as stupid and futile, and I think that's what was happening throughout the world. And so there was a very coming out of the dreadful experience of World War II, and then of course Vietnam, and prior to that Korea, just a recognition of just how awful that kind of thing is, adding to it the capacity to mass destruction, the damage that we can do now. I think scared the people of the world to say we better come up with something better, and we did. We came up with something better, and it's been working remarkably well. Just within the last decade or so, we seem to be slipping back. Some people seem to be slipping back, thinking that it's still okay. And frankly, I'm terribly concerned about some of the emerging leadership in our own country. We used to be in the lead on trying to make the world more peaceful. I fear that our new leadership doesn't understand that. It's just totally oblivious to the importance of the value of that concept and that culture. And so it scares me. And I think those of us who understand and care about these things need to be vigilant over the next few years to make sure the United States doesn't lead the world back in the wrong direction. We haven't yet, but I'm terribly concerned about some of the things that I see and hear. A total misunderstanding of how societies work and the importance of and the value of peace. We were raised under this incredible notion that war is good for the economy, and I think we finally learned we don't see that much anymore. But as you know, when we grew up, we were taught war was good for the economy. utter nonsense, absolute nonsense. The only reason we thought war was good for the economy is we came out of World War II and the economy became much, much better. Well, not because we fought a war. The only way that the war was good for the economy is that with government programs, government spending on the military, we did have reduce unemployment and create a whole lot of jobs. But if that money had been spent on education and positive development, it would have created more jobs and would have been far, far better. It's not the war is good for the economy. It's when there's public investment and commitment to things that's what's good for the economy. You can do that without war. And war is death and destruction. Peace provides and if you look at the Global Peace Index, the most peaceful countries in the world are across the board the most prosperous countries in the world. The correlation between peace and prosperity is absolute. Absolute. The most violent countries in the world are the least economically viable. So let's I was going to say, let's just put that notion to bed forever and ever.
Nowadays, of course, so our eyes and our intention is on the Middle East, but there's also been some signs in Africa where you spent a lot of your time
Yep.
that seem to be a little troubling, at least to the lay observer. Can you give us a take, particularly since you spent time in Africa? Where do you see where are you concerned in some of the nations there? But also, where do you see signs of hope or glimmers of hope that we can point to as well that maybe the new media doesn't pick up on?
Yeah, I'm troubled with some of the things that I see happening in Africa, encouraged by some other things we see happening in Africa. So the trouble spots. I'm deeply involved in the Sahel region, the Sahara region. Deeply involved with Mali, but other countries in the Sahel region, where jihadist movements, separatist movements, and so on have taken hold and are doing serious damage. But at the same time, democracy has taken hold in much of Africa, and it provides a mechanism to bring about changes in leadership through nonviolent means. And I've always liked to point to Ghana as one of my favorite countries as an example of a country that is democratic and is remarkably peaceful and doing quite well. And our first Dambach Fellow happens to be from Ghana and is deeply involved in what's going on there. They had an election, elected a president who frankly wasn't all that good, but they had an election just a couple of months ago, and through a peaceful election, they brought about new leadership. And there's reason to believe the new leadership is going to be extremely good and valuable for the country of Ghana and for that entire region of Africa. So I see things like that happening, and I find it very, very encouraging. And so while I'm troubled with some of the things I see happening, I also look to the positive examples and encourage the rest of the countries to look at the models that are making life better for people of Africa and say, model based on those that are making life better instead of those that advance a violent culture.
Let's go back to the idea of the culture of peace that you mentioned. And one component of that, I believe, is the notion of a service culture, which when you and I were back in school, the notion of, for example, joining the Peace Corps was a prominent idea, and that then bled over into other areas of service. A lot of people joining the civil service ranks in the nonprofit community and so on and so forth. What's your assessment of this service culture in the United States these days? Is the idea of young people joining the Peace Corps, or there's just the as part of their professional engagement or other kinds of service opportunities? Has that waned, or do you see it coming back? What's your take on this?
Well, it's a good question, and I fear it has waned somewhat. Certainly, it is not as strong as it was back in the 60s. We had a remarkable, inspirational president, John Kennedy, who challenged us to serve. And that's part of what got me thinking about it and moving in that direction, and probably you too, and so many of us. And so it was just kind of a part of the culture of our generation, that service was just something that you just do as part of the course of a positive lifetime. I don't see it having the permeating the society and the culture the way it did back then. And it's been waning for quite a while. I had a fascinating experience in 1999. A conference was held at the Kennedy Library in Boston. And in fact, it was Caroline Kennedy's first activity after her brother was killed in a plane crash. They brought together leaders from journalism, from politics, from government, from the nonprofit sector, and so on, to talk about that whole concept of service and where we are as a country. I was invited to be a part of it because of my leadership at the National Peace Corps Association. But you had members of the Kennedy administration and a whole bunch of heroes. In fact, about the only name you wouldn't recognize on the participants in this conference was mine. Everybody else was people like Ted Sorensen, for example, and my friend Harris Wofford. We are the people who made this thing happen. So we addressed that question: where are we with regard to the Kennedy challenge, the Ask Not challenge? And there was a sense that there was some slippage. There was also a sense that it was not always not lost, that indeed we can keep it up. I'm afraid since then, in the 2.5 decades since then, it has slipped even more. That we just don't see young people coming along thinking about service as a fundamental part of who they are and what they are and what our culture is all about. I hope we can get back to it. I fear that in the new cultural and political environment that it is not prevalent. But hopefully we will survive the current political and cultural environment and come out on the other side and say, wait a second, service and working together for the common good is what we need to be doing, what we want to be doing, and it makes life better when you make life better for all of us, that makes life better for our own lives and our own families. I hope we can get back to that, and I hope that the people involved with this endeavor that we're doing here and others will pick up the banner and carry it forward. I remain optimistic. I look at my own kids and my grandkids and say, they're good people. They're going to do it. They will get us back on track.
Well, if there's a young person who's watching this video, or maybe somebody mid-career even, who is contemplating a more direct life of service for the public good, perhaps maybe for religious motivation, or just being a part of civil society, what advice would you give them for how they would maybe steer their way toward the service of peace building? Where would you direct them? What advice do you have?
Well, the main advice would be to do it. And there are abundant ways and opportunities to do it. And one can do it either as a career, though there aren't very many ways to get paid to do the kind of thing. I'm incredibly fortunate to have actually gotten paid to do some of the stuff I've been able to do. But it can be a vocation or an avocation, but it can be a part of one's life, whether in the for-profit world or the not-for-profit world. Among my best friends are people incredibly successful in the business world. The president of Lucasfilm, a very profitable company, the returned Peace Corps volunteer, wonderful guy, Gordon Radley, dear friend of mine, has done quite well, thank you, in the business world, but shares these values. I just got a message from him yesterday talking about our mutual friend Peter Yarrow and his life. But people like Gordon, Gordon was a Peace Corps volunteer, but also highly successful in the business world, but devoted to making life better for humanity. And so it doesn't have to be in the nonprofit world, although I think that's the most direct way to do it. There are government agencies, government positions one can take that can make a difference, but it can be done as an avocation, a part of one's career. But if it's just a fundamental part of one's value set as a human being, recognizing that we share this planet, we depend on one another for our own well-being, and if we all recognize that, contribute to it in whatever way we can, then just do it. Just think about it and just do it.
Okay. Well, now back at Oklahoma State University, our alma mater, we've got the Dambach Peacebuilder Fellowship at the School of Global Studies. We've already got two students, one who's completed their studies and another one who's just getting started. And we hope more to come, of course. What are your aspirations for these graduate students who will be supported with funds in your name? What for now for these in future generations of peace builders? What are your hopes and dreams and aspirations for them as students in the future?
I appreciate that, and I don't want to put any undue pressure on them with indicating my expectations and aspirations, because it's up to them to do with it what they can and what they will. But the people who've been selected are those who have demonstrated a value set that is consistent with these concepts. So I would like to think that they will carry on in their professional careers and in their civil careers and in their lives, do what they can to make life better in their communities and in their cities and in their countries, and then hopefully they'll even have some measurable impact on a larger scale. But the main thing is to do what they can, hopefully inspired by and supported by this program, to do what they can to make life better for the people near them, around them, and that are not near them in their communities. Just do what you can to make life better. That's just basically it. If you go, and each has their own skills and their own connections and their own talents, and do it in your own way. And don't do it for me. Don't do it because of this. Do it because it's the right thing to do. And I've gotten to know these two very, very well, and they are phenomenal. I love them. They're both just so good, and I know they'll do it. And I'm confident the others will going forward. So again, they shouldn't feel any pressure from any of us. But I think they have the right value set, the right motivation. I think to go out and do the right thing.
Well, thank you, Chic, for taking the time to talk with us today and for your lifetime of service. Thank you for watching.